What do you need to do before applying to a video game school? Let's talk about that. So we're just going to jump right in at number 5, and this is going to flip the video on its head a bit. Do you really need to go to video game school? I have another video in which I talk about paths into the gaming industry, and going to video game school is a very common and very valid path, but it might not be the only path, and it might not be for everyone. Every resource you need to become a professional game developer is online for free or very low cost. But game schools do provide a ton of benefits and resources that you might not get if you're going solo. Not only do you have more motivation as you're learning alongside some friends and peers, you have an easier time networking with a school backing you and an alumni network to reach out to. You have a critical feedback circle of peers and professors who are there to help you learn and grow at all times. And college just might be the best time of your life. It was for me. I constantly wish I could go back in time and relive those memories because college was just so amazing for me. And if you're completely sold on a game school, that is a-okay, but just give it some thought. Number 4, figure out what you are passionate about. There are a ton of different roles on a game development team, and you want to figure out what kind of role suits you best. In general, there is game design, game programming, game art, and game production. There are a few other areas, but these are going to be the main 4 that compose most studios. So let's break them down a bit. First, we have game design. This is not the idea guy. There is no job in the industry where you are paid to make ideas and have other people make them. So if you have that in your mind, just get it out. That is not how it works. We can break down game design into a few categories. We have systems design, level design, technical design, sound design, narrative design, and a couple of more. You don't really need to worry about which specific one you're interested in the most right now, especially because you're in the application process, but it's a good thing to keep in consideration as you progress your student life, as the more energy and time you could devote towards a specialized sector of your major, the better you'll be and the higher the chance that you get hired. Because at the end of the day, a lot of large studios are looking for specialization. They're looking for level designers. They're looking for environment artists. They're looking for network engineers. They won't necessarily always be looking for general categories. So just keep it in mind as you go along. Then we have art. We can split art up into 2D and 3D, but most of the industry is in 3D. There are some 2D jobs. There are some games that are made in 2D, and then there are concept art roles, which are mostly 2D. However, these are much rarer, and with concept art specifically, those are usually only needed in the pre-production phase, and once the concept is solidified, you don't really need to make more concept, right? So 3D is generally much safer, so keep that in mind if you're making your decisions. And then game programming, which you might be interested in if you're very math-oriented or you like solving complex problems. You could break that down into a ton of different varieties too, so do your research and see what interests you the most just so you can keep it in mind as you progress through college. Lastly, we have game production. Not all schools have this, and junior production roles are fairly rare in the industry. And this isn't necessarily something that is game specific, as any company, as any studio that uses teams and has communication will require some form of management or producers in order to help keep things flowing and keep everything moving like a well-oiled machine. So that might interest you, but it's not necessarily game specific. So figure out what broad category interests you most and give some consideration towards what you might be most interested in a specialization. Number 3, do your research on your schools. Check the accreditation of the school. If it's a good school, it should have some regional accreditation. You could look that up by just Google searching school name accreditation. Make sure that schools aren't really scams. There are some game schools out there that try and sell you on what game development is, and they're really out there to just take your money. So make sure you're doing research on schools before you actually give them money or time. You can look up the school on LinkedIn and see what the alumni are up to, what studios are they working at now. You can check the ArtStation of art students and art graduates to see what the general level of art is, and you can compare that between different schools to just see how good are these schools at preparing their students for the industry. And any school worth its salt will have faculty that have worked in the industry. It doesn't need to be all of them, and it doesn't even need to be most of the faculty, but there should be people that have industry experience, preferably recent, that are at a school that is built to try and get students into the industry. I'll leave a link in the description below to the Princeton review, which shows a top 50 list of best schools for game design and in general game curriculums, and you can use that as a jumping off point if you have no clue where to even start. And I want to give a shout out here to Extra Credits. There'll be a link in the description below to a video on this topic in particular, and they also have a YouTube channel full of amazing resources for game developers, aspiring game developers, and everyone in between. So definitely go over there and check them out if you haven't heard of them already. Alright, number 2, be ready to commit yourself to your application. Most of these schools will require you to add something that a lot of general schools will not ask you to do. For artists, they'll ask you to submit a portfolio of artwork, typically 2D and 3D. A lot of you may not have any 3D experience, but the only thing that's stopping you from getting some is yourself. My friends that applied to the school and had 3D on their art portfolio were awful. The art was horrendous, but they showed 3D, which showed that they were willing to learn, which meant a lot in the application process. For designers, for me, every designer that applied to my school was given a board game prompt, and we had to make a board game out of it. The prompt for my year was "Winter is coming." I thought about it for a bit, and the first thing that came to my mind was hibernation. Winter is coming. You have to get food before winter comes so you don't die. Animal behavior sort of thing. And I added some twists, like each animal had a bonus speed on their terrain, and it was a 4-player PvP game, and you could set traps in your den, or you can go and try and steal other people's food. And I generally think it wasn't that bad. I had my dad playtest it with me to kind of confirm that the rules were working, and I used that as my application. Now, the reason why this is relevant is that a few years later, I was talking to some faculty, and the application process came up, and we talked a bit about, what they received. And, verbatim what they said was, we got a lot of applications that were about hibernation, and a lot of them were really bad, and we denied a lot of them. And I was just sitting there like, wow, yeah, must have sucked to be them, yeah. So I feel a little bit lucky there, but I do feel confident. And the moral of the story here is, if it's the first thing to come to your head, it is probably the first thing to come to a lot of other people's heads. And that doesn't necessarily mean don't do it, but it means think critically about it and make sure you're trying to give it a twist and make something interesting about it instead of doing the path of least resistance. So just be ready to spend a good chunk of time on some of these applications. Mine took me multiple days of, 4 to 6 hours of work. So it's definitely a commitment. All right, number 1, and this is the most important one by far. Be ready to work your ass off. Making games is nothing like playing games, and just because you've grown up loving games since you were a kid doesn't mean you'll like making games in the slightest. If you're going to a good school, you're going to be pulling all-nighters. You're going to be pulling super late nights into the wee hours of the morning, and it's just generally going to be possibly miserable at times. And that'll be a mix because you're scrambling to finish an assignment that's due the next day. But a lot of this is self-driven work. The best students and the ones that have the best chance to get hired are not those who are the smartest in the classroom, but they are the ones willing to bust their back to spend the extra hours to really make something that they are proud of. My school had more than a 50% dropout rates. My design peers through the 4 years cut in half. The art and engineering majors cut by 70% through the 4 years. A lot of people go to a game school without actually being ready to bust their back working, and it is a lot of work to go from 0 experience to ready for the industry. You will have to work so hard. But there is one silver lining here. It is truly worth it. The games industry is a dream job, and you are working towards achieving your dream, and it should be fun along the way. Thank you so much for listening. If you're interested in chatting more, the link to my Twitch is in the description. I stream Sunday afternoons as well as Friday nights. You can check me out there. I'd appreciate a follow. But I really appreciate you being here, so have a good night.